The gunshot echoed across the vast Arizona desert like thunder, startling Julia Lawson from her fevered concentration over her 7-year-old daughter's sick. Eliza's small frame shuddered beneath the quilt, her forehead burning with a fever that had raged for nearly a week in their small cabin on the outskirts of Los Alamos, New Mexico territory, in the spring of 1879. Julia pressed a damp cloth to her daughter's forehead, trying to ignore the commotion outside. "Hush now," she whispered, though Eliza's eyes remained closed, her breathing shallow. "Everything will be fine, my sweet girl." Another shot rang out, followed by shouts. Julia clenched her jaw, knowing she couldn't afford to be distracted. The town doctor had examined Eliza 3 days prior and delivered the devastating news that had turned Julia's world upside down. Her daughter suffered from a rare condition affecting her heart that required specialized treatment. The nearest physician who could help was in Denver, hundreds of miles away across treacherous territory. Mrs. Lawson. A frantic knocking at her door pulled her attention from Eliza. "Mrs. Lawson, please." Julia reluctantly left her daughter's side, smoothing her skirts as she approached the door. Her hands trembled as she pulled it open to reveal Mrs. Whittaker, the shopkeeper's wife, her normally composed face twisted with alarm. "There's been a shooting at the saloon," Mrs. Whittaker exclaimed. "They've called for anyone with medical knowledge, and I remembered you were a nurse during the war." Julia glanced back at Eliza. "I cannot leave my daughter. Sheriff Ellis says it's bad a stranger passing through town. Please, just for a moment." With painful reluctance, Julia fetched her small medical kit, the same one that had proven useless against Eliza's mysterious condition. "I'll return shortly," she promised her unconscious child, pressing a kiss to her burning forehead. The small frontier town buzzed with activity as Julia followed Mrs. Whittaker to the Bull's Head Saloon. Inside, a crowd had gathered around a man laid out on a table, blood seeping through his shirt where someone had applied pressure to his shoulder. "Let me through," Julia commanded, her nurse's instincts taking over. The crowd parted, and she found herself looking down at a lean, sunburned face framed by dark blonde hair. The man's eyes were closed, his breathing labored. "Bullet went clean through his shoulder," Sheriff Ellis explained, stepping back to give her room. "Some drifter accused him of cheating at cards." Julia cut away the blood-soaked shirt to reveal a muscular shoulder with an entry wound that, thankfully, appeared to have missed any vital areas. "I need hot water, clean cloth, and whiskey," she ordered, her hands already working to assess the damage. As she cleansed the wound, the man's eyes fluttered open a startling blue-green that reminded her of the turquoise stones the local Pueblo artisans carved into jewelry. He grimaced in pain but didn't cry out. "Stay still," Julia instructed firmly. "You've been shot." "Wouldn't be the first time, madam," he replied, his voice a low drawl that marked him as being from somewhere in Texas. "Though usually I know what I've done to deserve it." Despite herself, Julia felt a small smile tug at her lips. "I'm told it was a card game." "Ah," he nodded slightly, wincing at the movement. "That explains it. Fellow didn't take kindly to my full house." "Well, your luck holds." "The bullet passed through clean," Julia said, applying pressure to stop the bleeding, "though you'll be sore for quite some time." The man watched her work with curious eyes. "You have skilled hands, madam. Didn't expect to find a proper doctor in a place like Los Alamos." "I'm not a doctor," Julia corrected, pouring whiskey over the wound and causing him to hiss in pain. "I was a nurse during the war. The town doctor is." She hesitated, thinking of Dr. Thompson's unhelpful diagnosis of Eliza. "He's limited in his capabilities." "Name's Yates Garrison," the man offered as she began to bandage his shoulder. "Most folks call me Yates." "Julia Lawson," she replied absently, her thoughts already returning to Eliza. She tied off the bandage and stepped back. "Keep this clean. Change the dressing daily. And avoid card games with sore losers." "Much obliged, Mrs. Lawson," Yates said, attempting to sit up before wincing and lying back down. "You shouldn't move just yet. Is there someone who can help you to a room at the boarding house?" Sheriff Ellis stepped forward. "I'll see to it, Mrs. Lawson." "You best get back to your girl. How's she faring?" Julia's face fell, the brief distraction of tending to the wounded cowboy dissolving. "No better, I'm afraid, if you'll excuse me." She gathered her supplies, ignoring the curious gaze of Yates Garrison as she hurried from the saloon. The short walk back to her cabin seemed to take an eternity, guilt gnawing at her for leaving Eliza even for those brief minutes. Inside, Eliza remained as she had left her, small and frail beneath the quilt. Julia placed a hand on her daughter's chest, feeling the irregular heartbeat that had first alerted her that something was terribly wrong. The letter from Dr. Whitfield in Denver, a renowned physician whom she'd written to in desperation, sat on the bedside table. His response had given her hope but created an impossible challenge. Bring Eliza to Denver, and he would do everything in his power to help her, but the journey must be made quickly. Julia had barely enough money saved for the treatment itself, let alone hiring the necessary protection for such a dangerous journey. A widow for 3 years since her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident, she had supported herself and Eliza by sewing and occasionally assisting Dr. Thompson with difficult births or injuries. It was hardly enough to afford the armed escort required to travel safely to Denver. A soft knock at the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Wiping away tears she hadn't realized were falling, Julia crossed the room and opened the door to find Yates Garrison standing there, his arm in a makeshift sling, his hat in his good hand. "Mr. Garrison," she said, surprised, "you should be resting." "Begging your pardon, Mrs. Lawson," he said, his voice softer than it had been in the saloon. "Sheriff mentioned your daughter was ailing. Thought I might pay my respects, seeing as you likely saved my life back there." Julia hesitated before stepping back to allow him inside. "It's just a small cabin, I'm afraid." Yates entered, his tall frame seeming to fill the modest space. His eyes immediately went to Eliza and his expression softened. "She's mighty young to be so sick." "7 last winter," Julia said, returning to Eliza's bedside. "She has a condition affecting her heart. It's beyond what our local doctor can treat." Yates remained respectfully near the door, turning his hat in his hand. "That's a hard thing, Mrs. Lawson. Is there somewhere she can get proper care?" Julia brushed a strand of Eliza's dark hair from her forehead. "There's a specialist in Denver who might help her, but the journey—" She trailed off, not wanting to burden a stranger with her troubles. "Denver's a fair piece from here," Yates observed. "Rough country between—" "Yes, too rough for a woman and sick child alone." Julia straightened, gathering her composure. "But we'll find a way, we always have." Yates looked thoughtful, studying the small cabin with its neat furnishings and the few personal items that spoke of a life once more comfortable than their current circumstances. "When do you need to get her there?" "As soon as possible. Dr. Whitfield wrote that time is essential." Julia felt her voice break slightly. "But the stage only runs once a week, and even then it's not suitable for someone in Eliza's condition." "I'm heading north myself," Yates said carefully. "Got business in Colorado territory." "I've got a wagon and know the trails well enough." Julia looked up sharply, meeting his gaze. "Mr. Garrison, I couldn't possibly—" "You saved my life, Mrs. Lawson," he interrupted gently. "Where I come from, that creates a debt. Besides," he glanced at Eliza again, "I've got a sister back in Texas with young ones of her own. Can't imagine what she'd do in your position." "It's dangerous," Julia protested weakly, even as hope flickered to life inside her. "Your shoulder will heal just fine," he assured her. "I've driven cattle through Apache territory with worse injuries. A steady journey to Denver would be peaceful by comparison." Julia studied him, trying to discern his true intentions. Yates Garrison had the weathered look of a man who'd spent most of his life outdoors, but his eyes held a steady honesty that reminded her of Thomas in their early days together. "Why would you do this for strangers, Mr. Garrison?" His smile was slight but genuine. "Like I said, I owe you. And my ma raised me to believe good turns come back around. I can get you to Denver safe, Mrs. Lawson. You have my word on that." Julia looked back at Eliza, whose labored breathing seemed to make the decision for her. We can pay something, though not much. We can discuss that on the trail, Yates said, placing his hat back on his head. How soon can you be ready to leave? By morning, Julia answered, a strange mix of fear and relief washing over her. First light. Yates nodded, moving toward the door. I'll prepare the wagon tonight. Might not be as comfortable as a fancy stagecoach, but I'll make it suitable for the little one. He paused at the threshold. First light, then. After he left, Julia sank into the chair beside Eliza's bed, overwhelmed by the turn of events. Trusting her daughter's life to a stranger seemed reckless, yet something about Yates Garrison's straightforward offer felt right. She took Eliza's small hand in hers. We're going to get you help, my brave girl, she whispered. Just hold on a little longer. Dawn broke over the eastern mountains, painting the desert landscape in shades of amber and gold, as Julia loaded the last of their meager belongings into the back of Yates Garrison's wagon. He had been true to his word, arriving before sunup with a wagon outfitted with a makeshift bed of blankets and hay covered with clean linens. It ain't fancy, he'd apologized, but it'll keep her steady and as comfortable as possible on these roads. Now, as Julia carefully carried Eliza from the cabin, wrapped in quilts despite the promise of another warm day, she saw that Yates had added a canvas cover to shield them from the sun. He stepped forward to help, but she shook her head. I have her, she said, climbing carefully into the wagon bed. She settled Eliza onto the pallet, arranging her comfortably before checking her fever. Still high, but no higher than the night before a small mercy. Yates watched from beside the wagon, his injured arm now in a proper sling Julia had fashioned for him. I've plotted a course that follows water sources, he explained. Should make the journey easier on her. We'll stop regular to check her condition. Julia nodded gratefully. Thank you, Mr. Garrison. This is more than I could have hoped for. Yates, please, he insisted, climbing up to the driver's seat with surprising agility despite his injury. We'll be sharing a lot of trail dust over the next week or so, no need for formalities. As they prepared to depart, Sheriff Ellis approached the wagon, his expression concerned. You certain about this, Mrs. Lawson? There's still bandits in those hills, not to mention Comanche raiding parties crossing over from Texas now and again. I'm aware of the risks, Sheriff, Julia replied, her resolve firm. But Eliza needs this doctor, and Mr. Garrison has kindly offered to take us. Sheriff Ellis eyed Yates skeptically. Known this man less than a day, and you're trusting him with your lives. Yates met the sheriff's gaze evenly. I understand your concern, Sheriff, but I gave Mrs. Lawson my word, and I don't give that lightly. After a moment, the sheriff nodded reluctantly. Very well. Godspeed to you, then. He tipped his hat to Julia. Hope that little girl finds her healing in Denver. With final goodbyes to the small gathering of townsfolk who'd come to see them off, Yates flicked the reins, and the two sturdy horses pulled the wagon forward. Julia watched as Los Alamos receded behind them, the small cabin that had been their home for the past 3 years growing smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the trail. How long have you lived in Los Alamos? Yates asked as the wagon settled into a steady rhythm on the rutted trail. 3 years, Julia answered, keeping her voice low so as not to disturb Eliza, who had mercifully fallen into a fitful sleep. Since my husband died, Thomas was a mining engineer. There was an accident. I'm sorry for your loss, Yates said sincerely. Thank you. We moved west from Pennsylvania after the war. Thomas had dreams of making our fortune in silver. Instead, I found myself a widow in a strange town. Julia smoothed Eliza's hair. We've managed, though, until this illness. What happened? Yates asked, navigating the wagon carefully around a particularly deep rut. It started with fatigue, then breathlessness. When she fainted during a simple game of tag with the neighbor children, I knew something was terribly wrong. Julia sighed, the memory still raw. Doctor. Thompson examined her but could only tell me her heart wasn't working properly. I wrote to every doctor I could find, and Dr. Whitfield in Denver was the only one who offered real hope. Yates nodded thoughtfully. Denver's grown considerably since I was last there. Good doctors, good hospitals. If anyone can help her, they can. Have you been to Denver recently? Julia asked, curious about the man who now held their futures in his hands. Been about 2 years, he replied. I move around a fair bit, started ranching down in Texas after the war, but the drought pushed me north. Been working cattle drives, some prospecting, odd jobs here and there. And what business takes you to Colorado now? Julia asked, remembering his earlier mention, a slight hesitation. Meeting a man about a ranch property near Pikes Peak, thought it might be time to put down some roots. Julia studied his profile as he focused on the trail ahead. There was something in his tone that suggested there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had their secrets, and Yates Garrison had already shown more kindness than she could have expected from a stranger. The day progressed slowly, the wagon's steady rocking motion occasionally drawing soft moans from Eliza. Each time, Julia would dampen a cloth from their water supply and press it to her daughter's forehead, whispering reassurances. By midday, the sun beat down mercilessly. Yates guided the wagon toward a stand of cottonwood trees near a small creek, pulling to a stop in the shade. We'll rest here a while, he announced. Let the horses drink and cool down. Julia carefully climbed down from the wagon, stretching her stiff limbs. I should check your wound, she said, noting how Yates favored his injured side as he secured the horses. It can wait, he replied, retrieving a canteen from the front of the wagon. See to your daughter first, Julia nodded gratefully, climbing back into the wagon to tend to Eliza. To her relief, the girl's eyes fluttered open as she approached. Mama, Eliza's voice was weak, her normally bright eyes dulled by fever. I'm here, sweetheart, Julia said, helping her take small sips of water. How are you feeling? My chest hurts, Eliza whispered. Where are we? We're on our way to see a special doctor in Denver, Julia explained, brushing Eliza's damp hair back from her forehead. Mr. Garrison is taking us in his wagon. Eliza's gaze shifted to where Yates stood by the creek, filling canteens. The cowboy with the hurt arm. Julia smiled despite her worry. Yes, that's him. He's being very kind to help us. Eliza watched him for a moment. He's tall like Papa was. The innocent observation caught Julia off guard, a wave of grief washing over her. Yes, he is, she managed, swallowing the lump in her throat. Would you like something to eat? Just a little broth, perhaps? Eliza shook her head slightly, her eyelids already growing heavy again. Just tired, Mama. Then rest, my love. We have a long journey ahead. Julia continued to stroke Eliza's hair until the child drifted back to sleep. When she climbed down from the wagon again, she found Yates had built a small fire and was heating a pot of coffee. He offered her a tin cup as she approached. Thought you might need this, he said. How's she doing? She woke briefly, Julia said, accepting the coffee gratefully. But she's very weak. The fever drains her energy. Yates nodded, his expression grave. We'll make good time. Weather holds, we should reach Denver in about a week. Sooner if she takes a turn and we need to push harder. A week, Julia repeated, her heart sinking. It seemed both too long and not nearly enough time to prepare herself for whatever awaited them in Denver, either a miracle or heartbreak. Now, let me see that shoulder, she said, setting aside her fears to focus on the present. I need to change the bandage. Yates submitted to her examination without protest, removing his shirt to reveal the bandaged wound. Julia worked efficiently, cleaning the injury and applying a fresh bandage. It's healing well, she observed. No signs of infection. Told you I heal quick, Yates said with a slight smile. Advantage of clean living, Julia raised an eyebrow skeptically. Is that what you call getting shot in a saloon over a card game? Clean living, to her surprise, Yates laughed, a warm sound that somehow eased the tension that had been building inside her. Fair point, Mrs. Lawson. Though in my defense, I was winning honestly. Julia, she corrected him, finishing with the bandage. If I'm to call you Yates, you should call me Julia. Their eyes met briefly, and something passed between them, a moment of understanding, perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement that their fates were now intertwined on this journey. Whatever it was, it sent an unexpected flutter through Julia's chest that she quickly attributed to exhaustion and worry. "We should move on," she said, breaking the moment. "While the day is still young," Yates nodded, pulling his shirt back on. "We'll make another few hours before setting up camp for the night. There's a good spot I know about 10 miles ahead protected with fresh water nearby." As they continued their journey, the landscape gradually changed, the desert giving way to rolling hills dotted with piñon pines. Eliza slept through most of the afternoon, which Julia counted as a blessing. Each mile brought them closer to Denver, to Dr. Whitfield, to answers whether they would be the ones she prayed for remained to be seen. That evening, true to his word, Yates guided the wagon into a small canyon where a spring bubbled from the rocks, creating a small pool before continuing as a stream down the canyon floor. The walls of the canyon would protect them from the wind, and the abundant water meant comfort for both humans and horses. "This is perfect," Julia said as Yates helped her down from the wagon. "How did you know about this place?" "Camped here a few times over the years," he replied, unhitching the horses. "It's a bit off the main trail, so most folks pass it by, safer that way." While Yates tended to the horses and gathered wood for a fire, Julia prepared a simple supper of beans, salt pork, and biscuits from their provisions. Eliza woke again, more alert this time, even managing to eat a few spoonfuls of food before exhaustion claimed her once more. As darkness fell and the fire cast long shadows across the canyon walls, Julia and Yates sat in companionable silence, the events of the day weighing heavily on both of them. "You should get some rest," Yates finally said, breaking the silence. "I'll take first watch." "Watch?" Julia questioned. "Do you expect trouble?" Yates poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks floating upward. "Not expecting it, no, but out here it pays to be cautious. We're still a good ways from civilization." Julia nodded, understanding the wisdom in his words. "Wake me in a few hours, then." "You need rest too, especially with that shoulder." As she settled into the wagon beside Eliza, pulling a blanket over both of them, Julia watched Yates through the open back of the wagon. He sat with his back against a boulder, rifle across his lap, his profile illuminated by the flickering firelight. There was something reassuring about his steady presence, a calm confidence that made her believe they might actually reach Denver safely. With that comforting thought, Julia closed her eyes, the rhythmic sound of the nearby spring lulling her into the first peaceful sleep she'd had since Eliza fell ill. The next few days settled into a pattern. They would rise with the sun, break their fast with coffee and whatever simple meal Julia could prepare, then continue their journey northward. Eliza's condition remained stable, not improving, but thankfully not worsening either. Each night they would make camp, sharing the watch duties despite Yates's initial protests that Julia needed her rest more than he did. On the fourth day, as they crossed into Colorado territory, the weather turned. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon by mid-morning, and by noon, a steady rain began to fall. Yates quickly pulled the canvas tighter over the wagon bed, securing it to keep Eliza dry. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead," he called back to Julia as the rain intensified. "Used by cattle outfits during drives. Should be empty this time of year." Julia nodded, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders as the temperature dropped. The rain soon turned to a downpour, the trail becoming muddy and treacherous. Yates handled the team expertly, keeping them from bogging down in the worst spots, but their progress slowed considerably. By the time they reached the line shack, a crude but solid structure built of logs with a stone chimney, they were all thoroughly soaked and chilled. Yates helped Julia carry Eliza inside while rain pounded the roof. The interior was sparse, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, and a narrow bed frame with a straw-filled mattress. "Not exactly the Palmer house," Yates commented wryly as he set about building a fire in the stone hearth. "It's dry and has walls," Julia replied, laying Eliza on the bed. That's luxury enough. Once the fire was blazing, casting welcome warmth throughout the small space, Yates went back out to care for the horses and bring in their supplies. Julia changed Eliza into dry clothes, then checked her fever. To her dismay, it seemed higher than before. The chill from the rain, she murmured worriedly, placing another blanket over her daughter. Just what she didn't need. Yates returned, water dripping from his hat and coat. "Storm's setting in for the night by the looks of it," he reported, hanging his wet garments near the fire. "Horses are sheltered under the lean-to out back with plenty of feed." He noticed Julia's concerned expression as she sat beside Eliza. "She's worse," Julia nodded, not trusting her voice. Yates approached, his own expression grave as he looked down at the child. "We'll stay here until the weather breaks," he decided. "Pushing on in this mud would only slow us down more and jostle her too much." "But Denver," Julia began to protest. "We'll get there," Yates assured her, his voice gentle but firm. "But killing the horses or overturning the wagon won't help anyone. Sometimes the smartest thing is to wait out the storm." Julia knew he was right, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to keep moving to get Eliza to help as quickly as possible. She nodded reluctantly. "There are some herbs in my bag," she said. "Willow bark and others. I can make a tea that might help reduce her fever." While Julia prepared the medicinal tea, Yates rummaged through the supplies left in the shack by previous occupants. He found a can of peaches and some dried beef, which, along with their own provisions, made for a better supper than they'd had on the trail. The rain continued through the night, occasionally punctuated by thunder that rolled across the mountains. Eliza's fever remained high, causing her to toss and turn restlessly on the narrow bed. Julia refused to leave her side, applying cool cloths to her forehead and coaxing sips of the herbal tea between her parched lips when she woke. Near midnight, as Julia's own exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, Yates gently touched her shoulder. "Let me sit with her a while," he offered. "You need sleep, Julia." Too tired to argue, Julia allowed him to take her place beside the bed. She stretched out on a bedroll near the fire, intending to close her eyes for just a moment. Despite her worry, the warmth of the fire and the steady drumming of the rain lulled her into a deep sleep. When she woke, gray dawn light filtered through the single small window of the shack. The rain had stopped, though water still dripped from the eaves. Julia sat up abruptly, remembering Eliza. To her surprise, she found Yates still sitting beside the bed, his hand resting lightly on Eliza's smaller one. The child was sleeping peacefully, her breathing more even than it had been in days. "Her fever broke about 2 hours ago," Yates said quietly, noticing Julia's movement. "Started sweating something fierce, then settled into what looks like normal sleep." Julia hurried to feel Eliza's forehead, tears of relief springing to her eyes when she found it much cooler. "Thank God," she whispered. "I was so worried the journey was making her worse." "That tea of yours seemed to help," Yates observed, rising stiffly from his chair. He stretched, wincing slightly at the pull on his injured shoulder. "And she's stronger than she looks, your girl." Julia looked up at him, noticing the dark circles beneath his eyes. "You stayed with her all night." He shrugged, a gesture that managed to convey both that it was nothing and that he would do it again if needed. "Seemed like the right thing to do. You needed the rest." "Thank you," Julia said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of gratitude she felt. This man, practically a stranger a week ago, had shown more care and concern for her and Eliza than anyone since Thomas died. Yates cleared his throat, moving toward the door. "I'll check on the horses, see how the trail looks. With the rain stopped, we might be able to move on by midday if the mud started to firm up." After he left, Julia turned her attention back to Eliza, whose eyes had fluttered open. "Mama, I'm here, sweetheart," Julia said, smoothing her daughter's tangled hair. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Eliza said, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "Not so hot. Where's Mr. Yates?" The casual way Eliza referred to him brought a smile to Julia's lips. "He's checking on the horses. We had to stop because of the rain, but we'll continue our journey to Denver soon." Eliza nodded, her gaze moving around the simple shack. I like him, Mama. He tells good stories. Stories? Julia questioned, surprised. Last night when you were sleeping, Eliza explained. I was scared of the thunder, so he told me stories about Texas and the cattle drives and all the places he's been. He said his pa was a Texas Ranger and taught him how to track and ride and shoot. Julia hadn't known that about Yates. In fact, she realized, for all the miles they'd traveled together, there was still much about him that remained a mystery. Did he tell you anything else? Eliza's brow furrowed in concentration. He said he had a wife once, but she died from a fever like mine. That's why he wanted to help us get to the doctor. The revelation stunned Julia into silence. Yates had never mentioned a wife, let alone one he'd lost to illness. Suddenly, his determination to get them safely to Denver took on new meaning. It wasn't just kindness or a sense of obligation, it was a deeply personal mission. The door opened, and Yates stepped back inside, bringing with him the smell of damp earth and pine. Trail's still muddy, but it's drying out fast with the sun. Another couple hours, we should be able to move on. He noticed Eliza sitting up in bed. Well, look who's feeling better. Good morning, Miss Eliza. Good morning, Mr. Yates, Eliza replied with a small smile. Mama says we can continue to Denver soon. That we can, he confirmed, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. And with you feeling stronger, we'll make even better time. Julia watched the easy interaction between them, seeing how Yates spoke to Eliza not as a fragile invalid but as a person in her own right. It warmed her heart and eased some of the constant worry that had been her companion since Eliza first fell ill. While they waited for the trail to dry, Julia prepared a hearty breakfast from their supplies. Eliza managed to eat a small portion, the most she'd eaten in days, before drifting off to sleep again. Julia took the opportunity to step outside with Yates, who was checking the wagon for any damage from the storm. Eliza told me about your wife, she said quietly, watching his hands still on the wagon wheel he'd been examining. I'm so sorry, Yates, I had no idea. He straightened slowly, his expression unreadable. Happened 8 years ago. Sarah was her name. We'd been married just under 2 years when the fever took her. Is that why you offered to help us? Because of what happened to her? Yates was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. Partly, he finally admitted. When I saw your girl lying there, sick like Sarah was, I couldn't just ride away knowing there was something I could do. Julia placed a hand on his arm, feeling the tension in his muscles. Thank you for telling me, and for everything you're doing for us. His eyes met hers, a complexity of emotions visible in their depths. I couldn't save Sarah. Maybe helping you and Eliza is a way of making peace with that. He cleared his throat, looking away. Besides, like I said, you patched me up when I needed it. Fair exchange. They both knew it was far more than a fair exchange, but Julia didn't press. Instead, she helped him finish checking the wagon, and by early afternoon they were back on the trail, headed north toward Denver with renewed purpose. The next 3 days passed without major incident. The weather remained clear, and the trail, though still muddy in places, presented no serious obstacles. Eliza's condition continued to improve slightly, not enough to erase Julia's concern entirely, but enough to give her hope that they would reach Dr. Whitfield while there was still time to help her. As they made camp on what Yates assured them would be their last night on the trail, with Denver just half a day's journey ahead, Julia found herself experiencing mixed emotions. Relief that they had almost reached their destination, warred with an unexpected reluctance to see their journey end. Despite the circumstances, there had been moments of unexpected joy along the way. Eliza's delight at seeing a herd of pronghorn antelope, the stories Yates shared around the campfire each evening, and the growing sense of companionship between the three of them. Penny for your thoughts, Yates said, sitting beside her at the fire after Eliza had fallen asleep in the wagon. Julia smiled, watching the flames dance. I was just thinking about how strange life can be. A week ago, I was desperate and afraid with no idea how I would get Eliza to Denver. And now here we are, almost there, thanks to a stranger who got shot in a card game. Yates chuckled, the sound warm in the cool evening air. When you put it that way, it does sound rather providential. Do you believe in providence, Yates? Julia asked, curious about the man who had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. He considered the question seriously. I believe that sometimes the right people come into our lives at the right moment, though the reasons aren't always clear at the time. He looked at her, the firelight highlighting the angles of his face. Meeting you and Eliza in Los Alamos wasn't an accident, I don't think. The man who shot you might disagree, Julia replied with a small smile. Ah, well, he was a poor judge of character all around, Yates said lightly. But in all seriousness, Julia, I'm glad our paths crossed, despite the circumstances. As am I, she admitted softly, more than I can express. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the occasional nicker from the horses. Julia found herself studying Yates's profile, wondering what would happen once they reached Denver. Would he simply deliver them to Dr. Whitfield and continue on his way to his business near Pikes Peak? The thought created an unexpected ache in her chest. What will you do? She asked. After you've delivered us to Denver, Yates poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. Still need to meet with that rancher about the property, after that. He shrugged. Haven't thought much beyond getting you and Eliza to that doctor. Of course, Julia said quickly, feeling foolish for asking. I didn't mean to pry into your plans. You're not prying, he assured her. Truth is, my plans have been somewhat fluid for some time now. Since Sarah died, I haven't stayed in one place for long. He glanced at her. What about you? After Eliza gets treatment, Julia had asked herself the same question repeatedly over the past week. I don't know, she admitted. So much depends on what Dr. Whitfield says. If Eliza needs ongoing care, we might need to stay in Denver, at least for a while. Denver's a good city, Yates observed, growing fast, plenty of opportunities for a skilled woman like yourself. Perhaps, Julia agreed, though the prospect of starting over yet again in a new city was daunting. I've been thinking I might train properly as a nurse. There's a hospital in Denver that offers such training, according to Dr. Thompson. You'd be good at it, Yates said with conviction. Saved my life, didn't you? Julia smiled at his exaggeration. Hardly. The bullet missed anything vital. Still, he insisted, you've got a healer's touch. Gentle but firm when needed, people would trust you. The compliment warmed her more than the fire before them. Thank you, that means a great deal coming from you. Their eyes met across the flames, and for a moment Julia felt as though time stood still. There was something in Yates's gaze, a question perhaps, or a possibility neither of them had dared voice. The moment was broken by a soft call from the wagon. Mama, Julia rose quickly. Eliza's awake, I should go to her. Yates nodded, his expression returning to its usual calm. Get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day. As Julia climbed into the wagon to attend to Eliza, she found herself wondering what might have been said if they hadn't been interrupted. The thought followed her into her dreams, where Yates Garrison featured prominently, his steady presence a comfort in the uncertain future that awaited them in Denver. Morning dawned clear and bright, the air carrying the crisp scent of pine from the nearby mountains. Julia woke early, excitement and anxiety battling for dominance as she realized they would reach Denver by afternoon. Eliza seemed to share her anticipation, showing more energy than she had in weeks as they broke camp and prepared for the final leg of their journey. Will the doctor make me better right away, Mama? Eliza asked as they settled into the wagon. Julia chose her words carefully. Dr. Whitfield is very skilled, but it might take some time to find the right treatment for your heart condition. We must be patient. Eliza nodded solemnly, her small face serious beyond her years. But he can help me. He believes he can, Julia assured her, tucking a blanket around Eliza's legs despite the mild morning. And that's why we've made this journey. Yates appeared at the side of the wagon, offering them both a cup of coffee. He'd taken to brewing it strong, the way Julia preferred, though he teased her about ruining perfectly good beans with her Pennsylvania tastes, ready for the final push to civilization. He asked, his usual good humor evident despite the early hour. "More than ready," Julia replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Though I must admit, I've grown rather fond of our little wagon community." Something flickered in Yates's eyes, a softness that made Julia's heart beat faster. "As have I, Mrs. Lawson, as have I." The formality after days of using her given name caught Julia by surprise, but before she could comment, Yates had moved away to secure the last of their supplies. Soon they were underway, the wagon rolling steadily northward as the terrain gradually changed, the wild country giving way to more settled lands with occasional farmsteads and small settlements. By midday, they began to encounter more travelers on the road, freight wagons, riders on horseback, and even a stagecoach that thundered past in a cloud of dust. Signs of approaching Denver appeared with increasing frequency. Properly maintained roads, telegraph poles, and finally, in the distance, the smoke from the city's many chimneys. "There it is," Yates announced as they crested a hill that offered a panoramic view of the growing frontier city spread across the plain, the Rocky Mountains rising majestically behind it. "Denver." Julia leaned forward, taking in the sight with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Somewhere in that bustling city was Dr. Whitfield, the man she prayed would save her daughter's life. "It's bigger than I remembered," she murmured, noting the substantial buildings of brick and stone that had replaced the rough wooden structures of earlier years. "It grows every time I see it," Yates agreed. "Gold and silver bring the people and commerce keeps them here." He glanced back at her. "Dr. Whitfield's office, do you have the address?" Julia patted the pocket of her skirt where she kept his letter. "Yes, he's on Champa Street near the hospital." Yates nodded, flicking the reins to urge the horses forward. "We'll head there directly. No sense in delaying." As they descended into the outskirts of Denver, Julia found herself growing increasingly nervous. What if Dr. Whitfield couldn't help after all? What if they had made this dangerous journey for nothing? She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on Eliza, who was sitting up in the wagon bed, her eyes wide with wonder at the sights and sounds of the city. The streets of Denver bustled with activity, businessmen in suits, ladies in fashionable dresses, miners fresh from the diggings with gold dust still in their beards, and cowboys like Yates, their spurs jingling as they walked. Horse-drawn streetcars moved along certain thoroughfares, while vendors called out their wares from carts along the sidewalks. Yates navigated the wagon through the traffic with practiced ease, turning onto Champa Street and proceeding more slowly as they searched for Dr. Whitfield's office. They found it in a handsome 3-story brick building with a discreet brass plaque beside the door. "Dr. James Whitfield, specialist in diseases of the heart and lungs." Yates pulled the wagon to a stop, setting the brake before jumping down to help Julia and Eliza. As Julia gathered her daughter in her arms, she felt a momentary panic. This was the moment she had been hoping for, praying for, yet now that it had arrived, she found herself frozen with fear. Sensing her hesitation, Yates placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You've come this far, Julia. One more step." His quiet encouragement steadied her. With a grateful nod, Julia carried Eliza toward the entrance, Yates following close behind. The interior of Dr. Whitfield's office was far more elegant than Dr. Thompson's modest surgery in Los Alamos. Polished wood paneling lined the walls. Comfortable chairs were arranged around a central table stacked with medical journals, and the faint scent of carbolic acid spoke of modern medical practices. A middle-aged woman in a crisp white apron looked up from her desk as they entered. "May I help you?" "I'm Julia Lawson," Julia said, shifting Eliza's weight in her arms. "This is my daughter, Eliza. We have come from New Mexico Territory to see Dr. Whitfield. He's expecting us, though perhaps not quite so soon." Recognition dawned in the woman's eyes. "Mrs. Lawson, yes, doctor. Whitfield mentioned you might be arriving," She rose quickly. Please, come this way. The doctor is with a patient at present, but he'll want to see your daughter immediately. She led them to a smaller waiting room where Julia settled Eliza on a settee, the woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Perkins, Dr. Whitfield's nurse and assistant, asked several questions about Eliza's condition and their journey. All the way from Los Alamos, she marveled, making notes on a chart. That's quite an undertaking with a sick child. We wouldn't have made it without Mr. Garrison's help, Julia said, glancing at Yates, who stood somewhat awkwardly in the corner of the room, his hat in his hands. He brought us here in his wagon. Mrs. Perkins smiled at Yates. Then the doctor will want to thank you personally, Mr. Garrison. Your kindness may have saved this child's life. Before Yates could respond, a door opened, and a distinguished-looking man with silver-streaked black hair and wire-rimmed spectacles entered. Mrs. Perkins, I heard voices. He stopped when he saw Julia and Eliza. Ah, you must be Mrs. Lawson, and this is young Eliza. Dr. Whitfield, Julia acknowledged, rising to meet him. Thank you for agreeing to see us. The doctor approached Eliza, his manner gentle but professional. Hello, Eliza. I'm Dr. Whitfield. Your mother wrote to me about your heart, and I've been looking forward to meeting you. Eliza regarded him solemnly. Can you fix me, sir, so I don't get tired and my chest doesn't hurt? Dr. Whitfield smiled. I'm certainly going to try, my dear. But first, I need to examine you properly. Would that be all right? Eliza nodded, and the doctor turned to Julia. Mrs. Lawson, if you'll come with us, Mrs. Perkins will assist with the examination. Julia looked back at Yates, suddenly reluctant to leave him. Our friend will be quite comfortable here, Dr. Whitfield assured her, noticing Yates for the first time. Mr. Garrison, Yates supplied. Yates Garrison. Mr. Garrison brought us all the way from Los Alamos, Julia explained. Without him, we never would have made it to Denver. Dr. Whitfield's eyebrows rose. Indeed. Then we owe you a debt of gratitude, sir. Please make yourself comfortable. This may take some time. Yates nodded, his eyes meeting Julia's. I'll be here, he promised quietly. The simple words carried more meaning than they should have. Julia felt an irrational urge to cross the room and embrace him, to thank him once more for everything he had done. Instead, she simply nodded, then followed Dr. Whitfield and Mrs. Perkins as they carried Eliza into the examination room. The next 2 hours were a blur of questions, examinations, and consultations. Dr. Whitfield listened to Eliza's heart with a stethoscope, tested her reflexes, measured her pulse under various conditions, and asked detailed questions about the progression of her symptoms. He was thorough but kind, explaining things to Eliza in terms she could understand and addressing Julia's concerns with patient clarity. Finally, he sat back in his chair, removing his spectacles to polish them thoughtfully. Mrs. Lawson, I believe Eliza has what we call a ventricular septal defect, essentially, a hole between the chambers of her heart that's causing blood to flow improperly. Julia's own heart seemed to stop. Can it be treated? Yes, though it will require surgery, Dr. Whitfield said carefully. It's a relatively new procedure, but I've performed it successfully several times. The heart is exposed and the defect is repaired with sutures. Surgery on her heart, Julia whispered, horrified at the thought. Is it very dangerous? All surgery carries risks, the doctor admitted. But in Eliza's case, the alternative is a continued deterioration of her condition, which would eventually prove fatal. The surgery offers her the best chance for a normal life. Julia looked at Eliza, who had fallen asleep on the examination table, exhausted by the doctor's tests. Her daughter's face was peaceful in sleep, the dark circles under her eyes the only outward sign of her illness. When would you perform this surgery? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. I'd like to keep her under observation for at least a week first, to build her strength, doctor. Whitfield replied, The hospital has excellent facilities and I can arrange for her immediate admission. Julia nodded, the reality of their situation settling over her. They would be staying in Denver indefinitely, weeks, perhaps months. The cost? She began hesitantly, Doctor. Whitfield held up a hand. "Let's focus on Eliza's health first. I have a foundation that assists families in situations like yours. We'll discuss the financial arrangements later." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you, doctor. We've come so far. And you've done exactly right by your daughter," he assured her, patting her hand. "Now, let's get her settled at the hospital and then you can rest yourself. You look exhausted, Mrs. Lawson." As they made arrangements for Eliza's transfer to the hospital, Julia's thoughts kept returning to Yates. He had fulfilled his promise, delivering them safely to Denver and Dr. Whitfield. There was no reason for him to remain, yet the thought of saying goodbye filled her with an inexplicable sadness. When they returned to the waiting room, Yates stood immediately, his expression anxious. "How is she?" Julia shared doctor Whitfield's diagnosis and the plan for surgery, watching Yates's face as understanding dawned. "She has a good chance," she concluded, "but will be staying in Denver for quite some time." Yates nodded slowly. "That's good news about the surgery, and Denver's a fine place to stay." An awkward silence fell between them, neither quite knowing how to address the inevitable parting that loomed. Dr. Whitfield cleared his throat. "Mr. Garrison, I understand you've been instrumental in getting Mrs. Lawson and Eliza to Denver. On behalf of the medical community, I thank you." "Just doing what needed doing," Yates replied, his usual modesty evident. "Julia's the one who never gave up on getting her daughter help." "Indeed," the doctor agreed. "Now I've arranged for a carriage to take Eliza to the hospital. Mrs. Lawson, if you'll gather your things." The hospital has accommodations for parents of young patients. Julia nodded, suddenly aware that this might be her last moment with Yates. "Of course, I need a moment with Mr. Garrison first, if that's all right, doctor." Whitfield nodded understandingly, stepping away to confer with Mrs. Perkins about the hospital arrangements. Julia turned to Yates, finding it difficult to meet his eyes. "I don't know how to thank you properly," she began. "No thanks needed," he said softly. "Seeing Eliza get the help she needs is thanks enough." "What will you do now?" Julia asked, echoing their conversation from the previous night. Yates shifted his weight, his hat still in his hands. "Still need to meet with that rancher. He's expecting me tomorrow." He paused. "But after that, would it be all right if I came by the hospital? Just to check on Eliza, see how she's doing?" Hope flickered in Julia's chest. "We'd like that very much. She's grown quite fond of you." "And I of her," Yates admitted, then more quietly, "of both of you." The simple admission sent warmth spreading through Julia. Before she could respond, Dr. Whitfield approached again. "The carriage is here, Mrs. Lawson. We should get Eliza settled before she wakes." Julia nodded, torn between her daughter's immediate needs and her reluctance to leave Yates. "I'll be right there." When the doctor stepped away again, Julia impulsively reached out and took Yates's hand. "Thank you for everything, Yates, not just for bringing us to Denver, but for your kindness, your stories, your everything." His fingers tightened around hers. "This isn't goodbye, Julia. Just until tomorrow." "Until tomorrow," she agreed, the promise easing the ache in her heart. As the carriage carried her and a sleeping Eliza toward the hospital, Julia found herself looking back, watching Yates's tall figure standing outside Dr. Whitfield's office until he disappeared from view. Tomorrow suddenly seemed very far away. The Denver City Hospital was a modern brick building with wide windows and clean, well-lit wards. Eliza was given a private room thanks to Dr. Whitfield's influence, and Julia was provided with a small adjoining chamber where she could rest while remaining close to her daughter. The next 24 hours passed in a whirlwind of medical examinations, consultations, and preparations for the surgery that would take place the following week. Eliza, despite her weakness, approached each new experience with curiosity rather than fear, winning over the hospital staff with her quiet courage. Julia barely had time to think about Yates until late the next afternoon when a nurse appeared at the door of Eliza's room. "Mrs. Lawson, there's a gentleman asking to see you and Eliza. A Mr. Garrison," Julia's heart leaped. Yes, please send him in. Moments later, Yates appeared in the doorway, looking somewhat uncomfortable in the hospital setting but freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt. In his hands he held a small bundle wrapped in brown paper. "Mr. Yates," Eliza called from her bed, her face lighting up at the sight of him. "Hello, Miss Eliza," he replied, his own smile genuine as he approached her bed. "How are you feeling today?" "Better," she declared. "The doctors here give me special medicine, and Mama says I'm going to have an operation next week to fix my heart." "That's wonderful news," Yates said, glancing at Julia, who stood by the window. "Your Mama must be very relieved." "She cried," Eliza reported matter-of-factly. But she said they were happy tears. Julia felt her cheeks warm at the disclosure. "Eliza, perhaps you shouldn't share everything with Mr. Garrison," Yates chuckled. "I don't mind, honesty is a fine quality." He held out the paper-wrapped bundle. "I brought you something, Eliza. A little gift to help pass the time until your operation." Eliza's eyes widened as she carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a beautifully carved wooden horse, its details so fine that each muscle and hair seemed ready to spring into motion. "Oh, it's beautiful." "Made it myself," Yates admitted. "Had some time last night at the hotel, thought you might like a reminder of our journey." "I love it," Eliza declared, running her small fingers over the smooth wood. "It looks just like your horse, Samson." "That was the idea," Yates agreed, pleased by her reaction. Julia watched the interaction, touched by Yates's thoughtfulness. "It's a wonderful gift, Yates, thank you." He met her gaze, and that same unspoken connection she had felt at the campfire flowed between them. "How are you holding up?" he asked quietly. "Better now that we know what's wrong and that it can be treated," Julia replied. "Dr. Whitfield has been incredibly kind. He's arranged for financial assistance for the surgery and our stay here." "That's good to hear," Yates said, "and you're comfortable, getting enough rest." His concern for her welfare warmed Julia's heart. "Yes, though I admit I miss the open sky, the hospital is very efficient but rather confined. Perhaps," Yates began, then hesitated. "Perhaps when Eliza is resting well, you might allow me to take you for a short walk. The hospital has gardens, I noticed." "I'd like that," Julia said, perhaps too quickly. She smiled to cover her eagerness. "Some fresh air would be welcome." As if on cue, a nurse appeared to administer Eliza's afternoon medicine, which typically made her drowsy. "This might be a good time for that walk," Julia suggested. "If you're not busy, not at all," Yates replied. He turned to Eliza. "Will you be all right if your Mama and I take a short walk, Miss Eliza? We won't go far." Eliza nodded, already growing sleepy from the medicine. "Will you tell me another story when you come back?" "The best one I know," Yates promised, tucking the wooden horse beside her on the bed. Once Eliza had drifted off to sleep, Julia and Yates made their way down to the hospital gardens, a surprisingly pleasant space with benches set among flower beds and small trees. The late afternoon sun cast a golden light over everything, and the scent of roses filled the air. "This is lovely," Julia remarked as they walked slowly along a gravel path. "I didn't expect such beauty at a hospital." "Healing isn't just medicines and surgeries," Yates observed. "Sometimes it's sunshine and flowers and a moment of peace." Julia glanced at him, surprised by the philosophical comment. "That's very true. Did your meeting with the rancher go well?" Yates nodded. "It did. The property is everything he described: good water, decent grazing land, a solid house and barn. So you'll be staying in Colorado?" Julia asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "I'm considering it," he replied, studying her face. "Depends on a few things." "What things?" Julia pressed gently. Yates stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Julia, I need to be honest with you. My coming to Colorado wasn't just about a ranch property. That was true enough, but it wasn't the whole truth." Julia felt a flutter of apprehension. "What do you mean?" He took a deep breath. "I came to Colorado looking for a fresh start, yes, but also running from something. Or someone, I should say." "Yates, if you're in some kind of trouble, not the kind you're thinking," he assured her quickly. "Nothing illegal, just personal." Julia waited, sensing there was more he needed to say. Back in Texas, there's a woman, Caroline Henderson. Her father owns the largest ranch in the county. We grew up together, and after Sarah died, Caroline's father made it clear he thought we should marry. Yates ran a hand through his hair, a gesture Julia had come to recognize as a sign of discomfort. Caroline herself was persistent in her attentions. She's a fine woman, don't misunderstand me, but you didn't love her, Julia finished softly. No, Yates agreed. And I couldn't bear the thought of marrying without love, not after having known it once with Sarah. So when things became too pressing, I decided to leave Texas for a while. The ranch property here was a convenient reason. Julia absorbed this information, unsure how to respond. Part of her was relieved that his trouble was nothing more serious, but another part wondered what this meant for any feelings growing between them. "Why are you telling me this now?" she asked. Yates met her gaze steadily. "Because I've come to care for you and Eliza more than I expected to. And if there's to be anything between us, any possibility of something more than friendship, you deserve to know the truth about me." Julia's heart raced at his words. "Is there a possibility of something more?" "I believe there could be," he said quietly, "if you wanted it to." The directness of his statement took her breath away. For 3 years since Thomas's death, Julia had focused solely on survival and caring for Eliza. The idea of allowing herself to feel something for another man had seemed impossible, disloyal somehow. Yet here was Yates Garrison offering not just the possibility of his heart, but the honesty to reveal his past without pretense. "I don't know what to say," Julia admitted. "This is all happening so quickly." "We don't need to decide anything now," Yates assured her. "Eliza's health comes first." "I understand that. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Julia nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you for being honest with me. It means more than I can express." They continued their walk in companionable silence, the air between them charged with new awareness. When they reached a bench set beneath a flowering cherry tree, Julia paused. "May we sit for a moment? I find I need to gather my thoughts." "Of course," Yates agreed, settling beside her on the bench, careful to maintain a respectful distance. Julia folded her hands in her lap, choosing her words carefully. "When Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over. I never expected to feel anything for another man. It seemed impossible." Yates remained silent, letting her speak at her own pace. "But these past 2 weeks, with you seeing your kindness to Eliza, your willingness to help us at great personal risk and inconvenience, it's awakened feelings I thought were long buried." She looked up at him, her eyes meeting his directly. "I care for you too, Yates. More than I should, perhaps, given how little time we've known each other." A smile spread slowly across his face, transforming his weathered features. "Time isn't always the best measure of such things. Sometimes it's the quality of the moments, not their quantity." "Perhaps you're right," Julia agreed, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders at the admission of her feelings. "But Eliza's surgery comes first," Yates finished for her. "I wouldn't have it any other way. I'm not going anywhere, Julia. We have time." The simplicity of his declaration eased the last of her reservations. This man understood what mattered most to her, her daughter, and respected it. It was, perhaps, the greatest gift he could have given her. "Will you stay in Denver, at least until after the surgery?" she asked. "I will," he promised. "And I'll visit every day if that's all right with you." "More than all right," Julia assured him, her heart lighter than it had been in years. Eliza would be devastated if her storyteller disappeared. "Only Eliza?" Yates asked, a teasing note entering his voice. Julia felt a blush warm her cheeks. "Perhaps I would miss you a little too." His hand found hers on the bench between them, his calloused fingers entwining with hers. "Then I'll definitely stay." The week leading up to Eliza's surgery passed more quickly than Julia had anticipated, each day marked by Yates's visits. He arrived every afternoon without fail, sometimes bringing small gifts, a book of children's stories, fresh flowers for their room, or sweets that Dr. Whitfield approved for Eliza's diet. For Julia, These visits became the bright spots in days otherwise filled with medical consultations and growing anxiety about the surgery. Yates brought news from the outside world, humorous observations about Denver's bustling streets, and most importantly, a steady presence that anchored her when fear threatened to overwhelm her resolve. For Eliza, Yates became something of a hero. She eagerly anticipated his visits, and the stories he told tales of cattle drives and frontier adventures, always edited to be suitable for young ears, but exciting nonetheless. The wooden horse he had carved remained her constant companion, tucked beside her in the hospital bed. On the eve of the surgery, Yates arrived earlier than usual, his expression serious. "Thought you might need some company today," he explained as Julia met him in the corridor outside Eliza's room. "How is she?" "Surprisingly calm," Julia replied, glancing back at the room where Eliza was being examined by one of Dr. Whitfield's assistants. "Calmer than I am, if I'm honest." "And how are you?" Yates asked gently, noticing the shadows beneath her eyes. "Terrified," Julia admitted, the word barely a whisper. "Dr. Whitfield is confident, but the surgery is so dangerous. Her heart, Yates, they'll be operating on her heart." Without hesitation, Yates drew her into a comforting embrace, his arms strong around her shoulders. "She'll come through this, Julia. She's stronger than she looks like her mother." Julia allowed herself a moment of weakness, resting her head against his chest and drawing strength from his steady heartbeat. "I wish I had your confidence." "You do," he assured her. "It's just hidden beneath all that worry, but it's there." She pulled back slightly, looking up at him with gratitude. "Thank you for being here. I don't know how I would have faced this alone." "You're not alone," Yates said firmly. "Not anymore." The simple declaration carried a weight of promise that settled around Julia like a protective mantle. She nodded, straightening her shoulders. "No, I'm not, and neither is Eliza." When they entered the room together, Eliza looked up from the book she'd been showing the doctor's assistant. "Mr. Yates, you came early today. Couldn't wait to see my favorite patient," he replied, his smile genuine as he approached her bed. "How are you feeling about tomorrow's big day?" Eliza's small face grew serious. "Dr. Whitfield says I'll be asleep and won't feel anything. And when I wake up, my heart will be starting to get better." "That's exactly right," Yates confirmed. "And do you know what else?" "What?" Eliza asked, curiosity brightening her eyes. "While you're having your adventure in surgery, your mama and I will be right here waiting for you. And I'll be thinking up the best story yet to tell you when you wake up." This promise seemed to please Eliza immensely. "Will it have horses in it, and maybe a brave girl?" "Horses, a brave girl, and maybe even a mountain lion," Yates promised solemnly. "But only if you promise to rest well tonight and be strong tomorrow." "I promise," Eliza said, her small hand reaching for his larger one. Julia watched the interaction with a full heart, marveling at how completely Yates had integrated himself into their lives in such a short time. It was as if he had always been there, a steady presence they could rely on. That evening, after Eliza had been given a mild sedative to help her sleep, Julia found herself alone with Yates in the hospital's small visitor's room. The lamps were turned low, casting soft shadows across the plain furnishings. "You should try to rest too," Yates advised, noting her exhaustion. "Tomorrow will be a long day." "I know," Julia agreed, "but I don't think sleep will come easily tonight." They sat in companionable silence for a while, the soft ticking of a wall clock marking the passing minutes. Finally, Julia spoke the fear that had been haunting her. "What if she doesn't survive the surgery, Yates? What if I've brought her all this way, put her through this journey, only to lose her on the operating table?" Yates considered her words carefully before responding. "I can't promise that won't happen, Julia. No one can. But I believe with all my heart that you've done everything a mother could possibly do to give her child a chance at life. Whatever happens tomorrow, you must hold onto that truth." His honesty, though painful, was exactly what Julia needed. Not false reassurances, but acknowledgement of the reality they faced, tempered with genuine hope. "If the worst happens," she said quietly, "I don't know how I'll go on." "You won't have to face it alone," Yates replied, his voice steady. "Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll be here." Julia looked at him, truly looked at him, seeing not just the handsome cowboy who had appeared in her life by chance, but a man of profound depth and character. Why have you stayed with us? You fulfilled your promise. You got us to Denver, to Dr. Whitfield. You could have continued on your way." Yates met her gaze unflinchingly. "Because somewhere between Los Alamos and Denver, I realized that I'd found something I wasn't even looking for, something I thought I'd never find again after Sarah died." "What was that?" Julia asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "A reason to stop wandering," he said simply. "A woman I could care for, whose strength and courage humble me. A child whose spirit reminds me of all that's good in this world. A chance at a future that means something." Julia's heart swelled at his words, even knowing the risk. "That tomorrow might change everything, especially knowing that," Yates affirmed. "Life doesn't come with guarantees, Julia. We both know that better than most. But I'd rather face uncertainty with you than certainty without you." In that moment, Julia knew with absolute clarity that whatever happened in the operating room the next day, her life and Eliza's had been irrevocably changed by meeting Yates Garrison. He had given them more than safe passage to Denver. He had given them hope, companionship, and the promise of a future neither of them had dared imagine. "Thank you," she whispered, the words insufficient but heartfelt. Yates took her hand, his touch conveying what words could not. Together, they waited through the long night for the dawn that would bring Eliza's surgery and whatever fate had in store for all of them. Morning arrived with a pale, tentative sun breaking through clouds. Julia had managed a few hours of restless sleep in the chair beside Eliza's bed, waking each time her daughter stirred or a nurse came to check on her. Yates had remained in the visitors' room, appearing at their door at first light with cups of strong coffee and a determined expression that bolstered Julia's faltering courage. Dr. Whitfield arrived at precisely 8 o'clock, accompanied by 2 assistants and Mrs. Perkins. "Good morning," he greeted them, his manner professional but kind. "It's time to prepare Eliza for surgery. Mrs. Lawson, if you'd like a few moments with her." Julia nodded, her throat too tight for words. As the medical team stepped back to give them privacy, she leaned over Eliza's bed, smoothing her daughter's dark hair. "It's time, sweetheart," she said softly. "Dr. Whitfield is going to make your heart better today." Eliza blinked sleepily, the sedative from the night before still making her drowsy. "Will it hurt?" "No, my brave girl. You'll be fast asleep, and when you wake up, I'll be right here with you." "And Mr. Yates?" Eliza asked, her eyes seeking him in the doorway. Yates stepped forward at the mention of his name. "Right here, Miss Eliza, just like I promised." Eliza's small hand reached for the wooden horse that hadn't left her side since Yates had given it to her. "Will you keep Samson safe while I'm sleeping and give him back when I wake up?" "I will guard him with my life," Yates promised solemnly, accepting the carved figure. "He'll be waiting right alongside your mama and me." Dr. Whitfield approached again. "It's time, Eliza. We're going to take you to a special room now where we can help your heart." As the attendants prepared to move Eliza's bed, Julia felt panic rising in her chest. This was the moment she had been dreading, letting her daughter go into danger without being able to protect her. Yates must have sensed her distress, for his hand found hers, strong and steady. "She'll be all right," he murmured, "and so will you." Julia squeezed his hand gratefully, then bent to kiss Eliza's forehead. "I love you more than anything in this world," she whispered. "Be brave, my darling." "Love you too, Mama," Eliza replied drowsily. Then, surprising both adults, she added, "Love you, Mr. Yates." Yates's hand tightened around Julia's. "I love you too, little one," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "See you soon." With that, the attendants wheeled Eliza's bed from the room, leaving Julia and Yates standing alone in the suddenly empty space. For a moment, Julia couldn't move, couldn't breathe, as the reality of what was happening crashed over her. "Julia," Yates said gently, turning her to face him. Look at me. She raised her eyes to his, finding strength in his steady gaze. We're going to wait together, he continued. And when it gets too hard, you can hold on to me. That's what I'm here for. Julia nodded, unable to speak, and allowed him to lead her to the small private waiting area Dr. Whitfield had arranged for them. The next few hours would be the longest of her life, but she would not face them alone. The surgery lasted 6 hours of pacing, of prayers whispered and sometimes sobbed, of Yates's steady presence anchoring Julia when despair threatened to overwhelm her. Mrs. Perkins appeared twice with brief updates the surgery was proceeding as expected. Eliza was tolerating the anesthesia well, but these small reassurances did little to ease the terrible waiting. Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, Dr. Whitfield himself appeared at the waiting room door, still in his surgical garments. Julia stood immediately, her heart in her throat, unable to read his expression. "Mrs. Lawson," he began, removing his spectacles to clean them, a gesture that seemed to take an eternity. "The surgery was successful. We were able to repair the defect in Eliza's heart, and her vital signs are stable." Julia's knees buckled with relief, and Yates caught her, his arm strong around her waist. "She's alive. She's going to be all right," she asked, needing to hear the words explicitly. "She's alive and, barring complications, should make a full recovery," Dr. Whitfield confirmed. "The next 24 hours are critical, but I'm cautiously optimistic. She's a remarkably resilient child." Tears streamed down Julia's face, tears of joy, of relief, of exhaustion. "When can I see her?" "She's being moved to the recovery ward now. She'll remain unconscious for several hours yet, but you can sit with her." The doctor glanced at Yates. "Family only in the recovery ward, I'm afraid, Mr. Garrison." Before Julia could protest, Yates nodded his understanding. "Of course, doctor." "I'll wait here." Dr. Whitfield smiled slightly. "Perhaps we can make an exception later this evening if all continues to go well. Eliza asked specifically for both of you before the anesthesia took full effect." Julia looked at Yates, her heart too full for words. He squeezed her hand. "Go to Eliza," he urged gently. "I'll be here when you need me." With a grateful nod, Julia followed Dr. Whitfield to the recovery ward, where her daughter lay pale and still among white sheets. Despite the tubes and bandages, despite the frightening stillness, Eliza was alive, and for now, that was enough. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of medical checks, brief moments of consciousness for Eliza, and the constant, gnawing fear that something might still go wrong. Julia refused to leave her daughter's side, sleeping in short bursts in the chair beside the bed. Yates, true to his word, remained at the hospital, appearing whenever he was permitted to visit, bringing fresh clothes for Julia, decent food to supplement the hospital fare, and most importantly, his unwavering support. On the second day after the surgery, Eliza woke more fully, her eyes clearer than they had been in weeks despite the pain and discomfort of her healing chest. "Mama," she called weakly. "Is Mr. Yates here?" "I'm right here, sweetheart," Julia assured her, stroking her hand. "And Mr. Yates will come as soon as the doctors say it's all right." As if summoned by her words, Yates appeared in the doorway, carrying a small bunch of wildflowers. "Good morning, ladies," he greeted them, his smile widening when he saw Eliza awake. "Look who's feeling better today." "Mr. Yates," Eliza's pale face lit up. "Did you bring Samson?" "I surely did," Yates replied, producing the wooden horse from his pocket. "He's been mighty anxious to see you." As Yates placed the carved figure in Eliza's small hand, Julia watched the tenderness in his expression, the gentle way he spoke to her daughter. In that moment, she knew with absolute certainty that what she felt for him was more than gratitude, more than the connection forged through shared trials. It was love unexpected, perhaps unwelcome at a time when her focus should be entirely on Eliza, but undeniably real. The realization must have shown on her face, for when Yates looked up from Eliza, his eyes meeting Julia's, something passed between them, an acknowledgement, a promise. "I brought these for you," he said, offering Julia the wildflowers. "Thought they might brighten the room." "They're beautiful," she replied, accepting them with a smile. "Thank you. And I brought something else," Yates added, reaching into his coat pocket to produce a small paper bag. "Dr. Whitfield said Eliza might enjoy a treat now that she's on the mend." "Peppermint drops, if that's all right with you, Julia." The casual use of her first name felt right natural. "Of course. Eliza loves peppermints." As Yates offered Eliza a candy, their easy interaction reinforcing what Julia already knew, they had somehow, against all odds, become a family of sorts during their journey and these difficult days in Denver. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. They had faced the worst together. What might they build in more peaceful times? The following week saw steady improvement in Eliza's condition. The color returned to her cheeks, her breathing became easier, and the irregular heartbeat that had first alerted Julia to her condition gradually normalized. Dr. Whitfield pronounced the surgery an unqualified success, though he cautioned that full recovery would take time and patience. During this period, Yates became an even more constant presence in their lives. He found modest lodgings near the hospital, visited daily, and often took Julia for walks in the garden when Eliza was resting, providing brief respites from the hospital routine. They spoke of many things during these walks: their pasts, their hopes, the uncertain future that lay ahead. "Have you thought about what you'll do when Eliza is fully recovered?" Yates asked one afternoon as they sat on their favorite bench beneath the cherry tree, which now shed its blossoms like pink snow around them. Julia sighed, watching a petal land on her skirt. "Return to Los Alamos, I suppose. It's our home such as it is. And if you had other options?" Yates pressed gently. Julia looked at him, understanding the question behind the question. "What did you have in mind?" Yates took her hand, a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. "I've been thinking about that ranch property near Pikes Peak. It's a good piece of land, Julia. Good water, good grazing, the house needs work, but it's solid, room for a family to grow." Julia's heart quickened at the implication. "Are you asking me something, Yates?" He met her gaze steadily. "I'm asking if you and Eliza might consider making a home there, with me." Though she had sensed this conversation was coming, the reality of it still took her breath away. "Yates, I know it's soon," he continued quickly. "Too soon, maybe, but life's taught me not to waste time when something matters, and you and Eliza matter to me, Julia, more than I can say." Julia studied his face, the honest blue-green eyes, the lines etched by sun and wind and laughter, the steadiness that had become her anchor through the most frightening experience of her life. "It is soon," she agreed quietly, "but I can't deny what I feel for you, what Eliza feels for you." Hope flickered in Yates's eyes. "And what is that, love?" Julia said simply. Unexpected and perhaps inconvenient, but real nonetheless. A smile spread slowly across Yates's face, transforming his weathered features. "Inconvenient love," he repeated. "I think I can live with that." Julia laughed, the sound lighter than she'd felt in weeks. "I haven't agreed to anything yet, Mr. Garrison." "No," he acknowledged, his eyes twinkling. "But you haven't refused either. That seems promising." Before Julia could respond, a nurse appeared in the garden, calling her name. "Mrs. Lawson, Dr. Whitfield is with Eliza and asked me to find you." Alarmed, Julia stood immediately. "Is something wrong?" "No, madam. He has good news, he says." Julia and Yates exchanged glances before hurrying back to Eliza's room, where they found Dr. Whitfield examining the healing incision on Eliza's chest. "Ah, there you are," the doctor greeted them. "I was just telling Eliza that she's making excellent progress. So excellent, in fact, that I believe she can be discharged from the hospital at the end of the week." Julia's hand flew to her mouth. "So soon? She'll need continued rest and careful monitoring," Dr. Whitfield cautioned. "No strenuous activity for at least 2 months, but I see no reason why she can't continue her recovery in more comfortable surroundings, provided she has proper care." "That's wonderful news," Yates exclaimed, grinning at Eliza, who looked equally delighted. "Does this mean we're going home, Mama?" Eliza asked. The question gave Julia pause. "Home? Where was that now? The small cabin in Los Alamos seemed a lifetime away. Yates stepped forward, kneeling beside Eliza's bed. Actually, Miss Eliza, I was just discussing something with your mama that might interest you. How would you feel about a new home? One with lots of room to play when you're fully recovered and horses and mountains nearby. Eliza's eyes widened. A real ranch like in your stories. A real ranch, Yates confirmed. Not as big as some, but ours. Ours, Eliza repeated, looking between Yates and her mother. You mean you'd be there too? Yates glanced at Julia, seeking confirmation that this conversation was acceptable. She nodded, her heart too full for words. I would, Yates told Eliza, if you and your mama want that. Eliza considered this solemnly for a moment, then asked the question that made Julia's breath catch. Would you be like my papa? A shadow of emotion crossed Yates's face. I could never replace your real papa, Eliza. He'll always be special, and your mama will always make sure you remember him. But I would be honored to be a father to you if you'd let me. Eliza nodded, satisfied with this answer. I'd like that, and mama would too. She smiles different when you're here. Julia felt heat rise to her cheeks as both Dr. Whitfield and Yates turned to look at her. Eliza, really, it's true, Eliza insisted. And you laugh more. I like it when you laugh, Mama. Dr. Whitfield cleared his throat, an amused twinkle in his eye. I believe I've completed my examination. I'll leave you three to discuss these. Domestic arrangements. Mrs. Perkins will be by shortly with instructions for Eliza's care after discharge. After the doctor left, a moment of awkward silence filled the room. Finally, Yates stood, his expression uncertain. I should apologize, Julia. I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that, discussing the ranch with Eliza before we'd reached any decision. It's all right, Julia assured him, moving to stand beside him. Eliza has always been direct. She comes by it, honestly her father was the same way. So I gather, Yates said with a small smile, but the question remains. What do you think about my proposal? Julia took a deep breath, looking from Yates to Eliza and back again. I think I need to see this ranch before making any decisions, but I'm not opposed to the idea. Yates's smile widened. That's fair. As soon as Eliza is discharged and strong enough for a short journey, we'll visit the property. It's only about a day's ride from Denver. And if we like it. Julia asked, her heart racing with possibilities she hadn't dared consider a month ago. Then we make it a home, Yates said simply. Together. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and hope. Together. After 3 years of facing life's challenges alone, the prospect of sharing them the joys and sorrows, the work and rest with someone like Yates was both terrifying and exhilarating. Together, Julia repeated softly. I think I'd like that very much. 3 days later, Eliza was discharged from the hospital with strict instructions for her continued care. The question of where they would stay was solved by Yates, who had arranged for comfortable rooms at a respectable boarding house near the hospital, allowing for easy access to Dr. Whitfield for Eliza's follow-up examinations. As the weeks passed and Eliza's strength returned, the three of them fell into a routine that felt surprisingly natural. Yates would join them for breakfast each morning, then attend to his business finalizing the purchase of the ranch property, acquiring necessary supplies and livestock, making arrangements for their future. In the afternoons, he would return to take Eliza for gentle walks in the nearby park, regaling her with stories and gradually building her endurance. In the evenings, after Eliza was asleep, Julia and Yates would talk, getting to know each other in ways their urgent journey and the crisis of Eliza's surgery hadn't allowed. Julia learned about Yates's childhood in Texas, his service during the war on the Confederate side, though he spoke of it reluctantly, his brief, happy marriage to Sarah, and the years of restless wandering that followed her death. In turn, she shared her own story, her upbringing in Pennsylvania, her training as a nurse during the war on the Union side, a fact that they acknowledged with rueful smiles, her marriage to Thomas, and their journey west in search of a better life. "We're quite the pair," Yates observed one evening as they sat in the small parlor of the boarding house. "Union and Confederate, East and West. Seems we've covered all the divisions of our country between us." "And yet here we are," Julia replied, smiling, "finding common ground despite it all." "More than common ground, I hope," Yates said, his expression growing serious. "Julia, I've been patient, waiting for you to be ready, but I need to ask properly. Will you marry me? Be my wife, let me be a father to Eliza, make a life together on that ranch." Though she had known the question was coming, had even anticipated it, the reality of it still made Julia's heart race. "Yates, before you answer," he interrupted gently, "I want you to know something. I've loved twice in my life, first Sarah and now you. Different loves, but both real, both true. I never expected to find love again after Sarah died, but life has a way of surprising us." Julia nodded, understanding completely. "As it does. I thought that part of my life ended with Thomas. I couldn't imagine loving anyone else, giving Eliza another father. And now," Yates prompted, hope evident in his eyes, "now I can't imagine a future without you in it," Julia admitted. "Yes, Yates Garrison, yes, I will marry you." His face lit with a joy that took years from his weathered features. Without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all they would share in the years to come. The next morning they shared their news with Eliza, who received it with excitement tempered by a child's practical concerns. "Will we have our own room at the ranch?" she asked. "And can I have a pony when I'm stronger?" "Yes to both," Yates assured her, laughing. "And a garden for your mama, and maybe some chickens, and anything else that would make it feel like home." "When can we see it?" Eliza pressed, her recovery having given her a new energy that sometimes outpaced her healing body. "Doctor Whitfield says you're strong enough for a short journey," Julia told her. "So perhaps next week, if the weather holds." The following week brought clear skies and mild temperatures, perfect conditions for their excursion to the ranch property. Yates had purchased a comfortable carriage for the journey, mindful of Eliza's still delicate condition. As they traveled through the rolling foothills toward Pikes Peak, Julia watched the landscape change from the city outskirts to open countryside. Meadows bright with wildflowers gave way to stands of aspen and pine, and in the distance, the mountains rose majestic against the clear blue sky. "It's beautiful country," she observed, taking in the scenery. "Different from New Mexico, but beautiful in its own way." "Wait until you see the ranch," Yates replied, a note of pride in his voice. "It's about 2 more miles ahead, just beyond that rise." When they crested the hill, Julia's breath caught in her throat. Below them lay a valley cradled by gentle slopes, a stream winding through its center like a silver ribbon. Near the stream stood a substantial log house with a wide porch, a large barn, and several outbuildings. Pastures stretched in all directions, some already containing cattle and horses that Yates had purchased in anticipation of their move. "Oh, Yates," Julia breathed, "it's wonderful." "Look, Mama," Eliza exclaimed, pointing excitedly, "horses and a swing in that big tree." Indeed, Yates had hung a rope swing from a massive cottonwood near the house, one of many thoughtful touches he had added in preparation for their visit. As they approached the house, Julia noted other signs of Yates's careful planning. Flower beds freshly turned and ready for planting, a vegetable garden already sprouting early crops, and a new pump beside the kitchen door for convenient water access. "I hired some men from town to help with the preparations," Yates explained as he helped them down from the carriage. "And Mrs. Martinez from the neighboring ranch has been helping too. She's inside now, preparing lunch for us." The interior of the house was simple but well built, with 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen with a modern cook stove, and a comfortable living area centered around a stone fireplace. Through the windows, light streamed in, illuminating wooden floors that had been recently polished. "This is to be our home?" Julia asked, turning slowly to take in the spacious rooms. "If you like it," Yates replied, watching her reaction carefully. There's still work to be done, furnishings to choose, curtains to hang, your personal touches to add, but the bones are good. The bones are excellent, Julia agreed, smiling at his evident concern. It's perfect, Yates, more than I ever dreamed of having again. Relief washed over his face. I was worried it might seem too isolated after living in towns for so long. Not isolated, Julia corrected him. Private. Peaceful, room to breathe and grow. Their lunch with Mrs. Martinez, a cheerful widow from the neighboring ranch who had taken a motherly interest in Yates's preparations, confirmed Julia's positive impressions. The older woman spoke warmly of the local community, the school located about 3 miles away, perfect for Eliza once she was fully recovered, and the small church where most of the area families gathered on Sundays. After lunch, while Eliza rested on a quilt beneath the cottonwood tree, Yates took Julia on a tour of the property, showing her the pastures where they would graze cattle, the garden plot he had prepared for her, and the small creek that provided water for the livestock and irrigation for the crops. "What do you think?" he asked as they stood on a small rise overlooking the valley. "Could you be happy here?" Julia took his hand, leaning against his shoulder. "I already am," she said simply. "When can we move in?" Yates's arm slipped around her waist, drawing her closer. "Whenever you're ready. The property is paid for, the livestock are settled, and the house is habitable if not fully furnished. Let's not wait," Julia decided. "Eliza grows stronger every day, and I think being here, away from the city, would be good for her recovery." "And for us," Yates added softly. "A fresh start together." Julia looked up at him, seeing the future reflected in his eyes, a future neither of them had imagined when their paths crossed in a dusty saloon in Los Alamos. "Together," she agreed, sealing the promise with a kiss. 2 weeks later, under a perfect Colorado sky, Julia Lawson became Julia Garrison in a simple ceremony at the small church Mrs. Martinez had described. Eliza stood proudly beside her mother, holding a bouquet of wildflowers that matched Julia's own. Dr. Whitfield, who had become a friend as well as a physician, gave the bride away, while several of the neighboring ranchers and their families attended as witnesses and well-wishers. The celebration afterward at the ranch was modest but joyful, with plenty of food, music from a local fiddler, and dancing on the wide front porch. As evening fell and the guests gradually departed, Julia found herself standing with Yates at the same overlook where they had decided to make this place their home. "Happy, Mrs. Garrison?" Yates asked, his arm around her waist. "Extraordinarily so, Mr. Garrison," Julia replied, leaning into his embrace, "though it still seems somewhat miraculous how we came to be here." "Life's full of unexpected turns," Yates observed. "Some tragic, some blessed. The trick is recognizing the blessed ones when they come along." Julia nodded, thinking of the long, difficult journey that had brought them to this moment: Eliza's illness, the desperate search for help, the chance meeting with Yates, the successful surgery, and now this new beginning. "I never imagined when Eliza first fell ill that her condition would lead us to happiness," she admitted. "I was so frightened, so certain we faced only sorrow. And yet here we are," Yates said, gesturing to the valley below where their home glowed with warmth and light in the gathering dusk. "Eliza healing, a new home, a new family." "A new family," Julia repeated, savoring the words. "Speaking of which, we should check on our daughter. It's been an exciting day and she still tires easily." They found Eliza on the porch swing, drowsy but content, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. "Can I sleep in my new room tonight?" she asked as Julia and Yates approached. "Of course," Julia replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "That's why we brought all your things over yesterday, remember?" Eliza nodded, yawning. "And tomorrow, can Mr. Yates, Papa, show me the pony he promised?" Yates's eyes met Julia's over Eliza's head, emotion evident in his gaze at being called Papa for the first time. "First thing in the morning," he promised, his voice slightly rough. "After breakfast." As Julia helped Eliza prepare for bed in her new room, painted a cheerful yellow, With curtains that matched the quilt Yates had commissioned from a talented seamstress in Denver, she marveled at how quickly her daughter had adapted to their new circumstances. Children were resilient, Doctor. Whitfield had told her, and Eliza was proving him right with every passing day. "Are you happy here, sweetheart?" Julia asked as she tucked Eliza into bed. "Yes, Mama," Eliza replied sleepily. "It's like the stories Mr. Yates' papa told me in the hospital. A ranch with horses and room to run when I'm stronger, and you're happy too, I can tell." "I am," Julia confirmed, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Very happy." "Papa makes you smile," Eliza observed, her eyelids growing heavy. "And you make him smile too, that's good, isn't it?" "Very good," Julia agreed. "Now sleep, my brave girl. Tomorrow is the first day of our new adventure." When Eliza had drifted off to sleep, Julia made her way back to the main room, where Yates waited by the fireplace, 2 glasses of wine poured in anticipation of their first evening alone as husband and wife. "She's asleep?" he asked, handing Julia a glass. "Almost before her head touched the pillow," Julia confirmed. The excitement of the day caught up with her. "And you?" Yates asked, studying her face in the firelight. "Are you tired?" Julia sipped her wine, considering the question. "Strangely, no, I feel energized. As if this new chapter of our lives has given me strength I didn't know I had." Yates smiled, setting aside his own glass to take hers and place it on the mantel. "In that case, Mrs. Garrison, may I have this dance?" "There's no music," Julia pointed out, though she willingly stepped into his arms. "We don't need any," Yates replied, beginning to sway gently, holding her close. "Just us together at the beginning of everything." As they moved in the firelit room, Julia rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. From Eliza's illness had come this unexpected joy, this second chance at love and family that neither of them had sought but both had found. "Thank you," she whispered against Yates's shirt. "For what?" he asked, his cheek resting against her hair. "For stopping in Los Alamos. For getting shot in that card game. For offering to take us to Denver when we needed it most. For staying with us through Eliza's surgery. For loving us both enough to create this home." Julia lifted her head to meet his gaze. "For everything." Yates's hand cupped her cheek, his expression tender. "No thanks needed, Julia. I found my home when I found you and Eliza. Everything else, this ranch, our marriage, the life we're building, it all started the moment you walked into that saloon to patch up a stranger." Their lips met in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together, the joys and challenges, the growth of their family, the roots they would put down in this valley that had become their sanctuary. Outside, the stars shone over the Colorado mountains, watching over the ranch where a small family formed by chance, circumstance, and love had found their way home at last. Epilogue: 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the valley, turning the meadow grass golden and warming the waters of the creek that ran through the heart of the Garrison Ranch. From her position on the front porch, Julia watched as Yates led a patient pony around the yard, his strong hands steady on the lead rope while 3-year-old Thomas, named for Julia's first husband, a tribute Yates had suggested, bounced excitedly in the small saddle. "Look, Mama," Thomas called, waving with one hand while clutching the saddle horn with the other. "I'm riding like Papa and Liza." "I see you, my brave boy," Julia called back, smiling at her son's enthusiasm. The child was a perfect blend of his parents, Yates's blue-green eyes and Julia's dark hair, with a spirit of adventure that kept them all on their toes. From the meadow beyond the yard came the sound of laughter. Eliza, now 12, and fully recovered from her heart surgery, raced her own horse alongside her friend Sarah, the daughter of a neighboring rancher and Eliza's constant companion. The two girls had become inseparable over the past few years, their bond strengthened by shared interests in horses, books, and exploration of the valley's many wonders. Julia's hand moved unconsciously to her rounded belly, where their third child, a girl, according to Dr. Whitfield's prediction during his last visit, grew steadily. 4 months to go before their family would expand again, bringing new joy to the home that had flourished beyond all expectations. The ranch had prospered under Yates's careful management and Julia's practical support. The herd of cattle had grown, the gardens yielded abundant produce, and the reputation of Garrison Ranch for quality and fair dealing had spread throughout the county. 3 years ago, they had added a new wing to the house, providing more space for their growing family and occasional guests. Julia herself had found an unexpected role in the community, utilizing her nursing skills to assist neighbors during illnesses, births, and injuries when the journey to the doctor in town would take too long. With Dr. Whitfield's encouragement and guidance during his twice-yearly visits to check on Eliza, Julia had expanded her knowledge, becoming a respected midwife and healer for the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area. "What has you smiling so?" Yates asked, approaching the porch after handing Thomas off to Mrs. Martinez, now their housekeeper and honorary grandmother to the children, for his midday rest. "Just counting our blessings," Julia replied, making room for him on the porch swing beside her, remembering how it all began. Yates settled beside her, his arm naturally finding its place around her shoulders. At 42, he was still as handsome as the day they'd met, though silver now threaded through his hair at the temples, and the lines around his eyes had deepened from years of squinting into the Colorado sun. "Quite a journey we've had," he observed, watching Eliza and Sarah race toward the creek, their horses splashing through the shallows. "From a bullet wound in Los Alamos to this. Would you change any of it?" Julia asked, though she already knew the answer. Yates considered the question seriously, as he did all things. "Not a moment," he finally said. "Even the hardest parts brought us here to this life we've built together." Julia leaned against him, contentment washing over her like the warm summer breeze that rustled the cottonwood leaves above them. From Eliza's illness had come not just healing, but a whole new life. None of them could have imagined a second chance at love, a family blended and expanded, a home filled with laughter and purpose. "Nor would I," she agreed softly. "Every step of the path, difficult as it sometimes was, led us home." As if to emphasize her words, Eliza and Sarah turned their horses back toward the house, their faces alight with youth and joy, the future stretching before them as vast and promising as the Colorado sky above. Thomas's laughter drifted from the kitchen, where Mrs. Martinez was undoubtedly spoiling him with cookies fresh from the oven. And the child within Julia stirred, a gentle reminder of life's continuing miracles. Yates's hand found hers, their fingers entwining as they had countless times over the years. No words were needed in that moment, just the shared acknowledgement of how far they had come and the journey still ahead, a journey they would face as they had faced all others, together.